Good morning. It's a beautiful sunny day in early January 2021, and we are on runway 33 at Groton New London Airport in southern Connecticut near the shoreline. And this is a Microsoft Flight Simulator, the new version 2020 tutorial on how to use the Garmin 1000 Autopilot, specifically the Autopilot system. And we will not be discussing everything about the Autopilot system. There are a lot of knobs and switches and buttons on that thing. You have back course and go arounds and all sorts of things. This is for the newer pilot who wants to know the basics. So what can I use the Autopilot for in routine flying? How do I hold a course? How can I hold an altitude? How would I change that course? Etc. So that is what we are doing today. We will not be talking, well, I might mention the navigation, how to follow a nav course, but I don't have one plugged in right now, but I can still demonstrate that it's simple enough. All right, so without further ado, let's go into the cockpit and take a look. All right, we are sitting in the cockpit of the Cessna 172 G1000, which is the newer version with the glass cockpit. And there are two displays, two large monitors in this cockpit. The monitor on the left is called the PFD, or Primary Flight Display. That is what the pilot uses. It's intended primarily for the pilot. Any of you who have flown military simulators are probably very familiar with the tapes, they call them, or bands on each side. On the left shows your velocity, your speed, and on the right your altitude. In the center is a course direction indicator, or CDI. We will be referring to that quite a bit. That is right here, this circle here. On the left over here is there's two rows of buttons, two columns of buttons I should say. And these are all the buttons that are for your Autopilot. And there are two more that you need to know. One is right above it, this one here that says heading. And then at the bottom, the one that says altitude, increase and decrease altitude. That's pretty much it. And of all of these buttons here, the only ones today we're really going to concern ourselves with much is AP, which is the on and off button for the Autopilot. I'm going to push it on now, and you'll notice that up here at the top, this is where all the status is for your Autopilot, up here. And this bottom row, all these green letters here. Let me zoom in on that. Okay, so you have ROL means roll, AP stands for Autopilot, VS is vertical speed of 200 feet per minute, etc. Okay, and we'll talk more about that when we get to it. So I'm going to turn the Autopilot back off. One other thing you should know about is this key here, FD, which is your flight director. And it's on right now. It comes on automatically when you turn the Autopilot on, I believe, pretty sure it does. I'm going to turn it off now. And you'll notice, look at the track on here that shows our projected direction. When I turn the flight director on, you get these purple bands. The purpose of the flight director is to tell you, it gives you guidance for what heading to steer. That is actually the part of the computer that tells when the Autopilot's engaged. It is the flight director that tells the Autopilot what to do, i.e. bank the wings 10 degrees to the right and come to this course, or change altitude using 200 feet per second upward velocity to arrive at 4,000 feet. That all comes from the flight director. However, you can use the flight director without the autopilot if you like. I could engage my flight director, okay, and with the flight director engaged, if I follow the instructions, and I'll show you how to do that when we're airborne, you can just use it as a guide to what course to steer and what altitude to climb to, etc., if you want to. Alright, so now the first thing I'm going to talk about is different modes of the autopilot. I had to play around with this quite a bit to figure all this out, and I did refer to the Garmin 1000 manual for they call it the AFCS, Automated Flight Control System, i.e. autopilot. So I'm going to make sure everything's off here. When it says turn heading on, that means the heading is off right now. Okay, so all these buttons are off, altitude mode is off, etc. Okay, nav mode is off. I believe they're all off right now. So what can I do with the autopilot? And I'm going to run through these quickly before we take off, and then I'll demonstrate each one. So the most basic thing you can do with an autopilot is turn it on when you're flying, and the autopilot, if you don't give it any other instructions, it will go into a pitch and bank hold mode. It will hold your current attitude, except it will not hold a bank. In other words, if I'm in a bank, let's say I have a 5-degree up pitch, I'm climbing. Let's say I leave the airport, and I'll show you this when we take off. Let's say I'm leaving the airport, and I've got about a 10-degree pitch up while I'm climbing out, and I'm going roughly, I'll just say 330 because that's our runway heading. Then I can hit the autopilot button at any time, and it will maintain that pitch, and it will maintain your wings level. And if your wings are not level, it will level them. So it's a really good tool to hold the status quo. So if let's say you're climbing, you're roughly on course north, and you're climbing to 3,000 feet. You got a little up angle, pitch up on the airplane, and you hit the autopilot button. It'll hold that for you. It'll keep your wings level. It's not steering a course. It's just maintaining your wings level, which most of the time will be pretty close to. It'll hold a course for a while anyway. And it will maintain that 5-degree pitch up that you have. And when you're, maybe you're folding your map up or putting something away, or, talking to somebody, and then when you get close to your desired altitude, or, then you just hit the autopilot button again and take over control of the airplane, and off you go. By the way, while we're on the subject, if you ever have the autopilot engaged and you need to make an emergency maneuver, and you move the ailerons or the elevators more than a certain amount, the autopilot will automatically disengage. It will not keep you, locked in while you're plummeting to the earth or about to run into another airplane in the air. So you can make emergency maneuvers if you need to. Normally that's not how you would disengage your autopilot, but you can. I strongly recommend that you map a key for your autopilot, and I'll show you that right now. I'm going to show you the key you need to map. You just need a button on your joystick or on your yoke. We'll go to controls. I'm using a CH flight stick, and we have assigned, and I'm going to find the autopilot. Flight control surfaces. Where are you? Here it is. Autopilot. Toggle Autopilot Master. And here's my switch right here. I'm going to prove it. And it's flashing the 9. That's validating it. Okay. That's what toggles my autopilot on and off. That's a very handy thing to have on your yoke or your joystick, your flight stick. Okay. So let's go back. We didn't change anything. Now, if you watch, I'm going to push that button, and you can see up here the AP right now is yellow, which means it's not engaged. I'm going to push the button, turns green. Now it's engaged. I'm moving my yoke, but you'll notice that the virtual yoke is not moving. It's because the ailerons are not moving. Okay, because I've engaged the autopilot and it's maintaining a level attitude, even though I'm sitting on the runway. Right now, I'm moving my yoke. You see how little those ailerons are moving, and when I let go of the yoke, they bounce right back. Okay, they don't stay. All right, so let's go back in the cockpit here. All right, so that's key point number 1. You can use the autopilot to maintain your will level your wings and maintain an approximate heading. It's not really maintaining a heading. It will level your wings. It'll maintain your pitch at the time you hit the autopilot button. So if you're pitched 10 degrees up when you hit that button, it's going to try to maintain that. All right, simple enough. All right, next item on the agenda. How do I program a heading into the autopilot? Suppose, so let's say I'm flying along right now on 330, which is my compass heading. Suppose that I wanted to come to course north instead of 330, and I wanted the autopilot to steer course north. How would I do that? All right, so first of all, I would do that with the heading button, this big knob up here, okay? This knob rotates clockwise or counterclockwise, and all it does is it moves a bug around your CDI. Remember, we said the CDI, or the course direction indicator, is this compass type thing here, display, and the bug is this little blue thing right here. You see that? We call that the bug, or the heading bug. And don't ask me how I got that name. I guess it looked like a little bug on the older gyro displays. But anyway, it's called a heading bug. And when I rotate this heading knob, you see that the bug is moving. You see, and it also is telling me here what heading I'm setting it to. So if I want the autopilot to steer north, I need to turn this knob clockwise until I get to 000 or 360, as the case may be. And I'm going to sneak up on it here. Almost, huh? Okay, I have the bug set on due north. Now, the autopilot will not try to steer that course until I do one more thing. Now, first of all, I have to have the autopilot engaged, and I have it engaged right now, but I haven't hit the heading button. So, and by the way, I can set this bug up while I have the autopilot off. So you could do this on the ground, which might be a good idea, or if you're flying along, like we said, you took off, you use the autopilot to maintain your roll and pitch. Now I'm ready to come to north. I can set my bug, but if you already have the bug set before you take off, it's a lot less fumbling around when you're when you're supposed to be flying the airplane. So if that's already set, that makes life a lot easier. So let's imagine I'm flying 330 now, and my autopilot is on. So it's maintaining my my bank, zero bank, right? It's maintaining me level as far as roll goes, and I hit the autopilot's on. If I hit the heading button right now, the autopilot is going to try. Well, watch the yoke. See the yoke go over? It's going way over like that because the autopilot is trying to steer me to course north. But obviously it's not the airplane's not responding because we're sitting on the ground. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to turn that off. Okay, I just turned the headings off, and my yokes are still way over. So this is a little weird. I'm going to disengage the autopilot. All right, and re-engage it now. Oh, it's still trying to do that. Interesting. Yeah, that's a little weird. That's not right. It should not be doing that. It should not be doing that. I heard this thing has a few bugs, so be careful with that. Now, I'll tell you what I'm going to do that will probably fix this. Let me turn on the autopilot again. Now, another neat feature of this heading bug is instead of dialing the heading bug in, you can just push this knob and it will set the heading bug instantly to your current course. And I'm going to do that, which should move the bug to 330 and should make my yokes come back. But I'm probably screwing it all up because I'm not moving. So we'll forget about that. And I'm going to disengage my autopilot. Here we go. Because it's really messing up my display here. Alright, so that's how you steer a heading. You put the bug wherever you want it. You can hit the heading button and it will set the bug to your current course, which is a handy feature. Or you can use the heading button to dial in a different course and then hit heading, and it will turn the heading select on and start steering for that course. Okay. Alright, the only other feature we need to talk about, which is a little more complicated in some ways, is altitude. So how do I set an altitude? Well, you use this knob down here called the altitude knob. You also have a button here called altitude, which will turn on an altitude hold mode, which I think will hold your present altitude. Maybe. We'll find out. I'm pretty sure it does. It's supposed to. If I just click that button with no other inputs, it should hold my current altitude. It should bring the nose down and maintain whatever altitude I'm at when I push the button. So now we're going to go to, how do I get to a new altitude? Well, we have this altitude knob. Now, to see what altitude you have selected, look up to the top of the altitude ribbon here, and you'll see in blue a number. This right now, my selected altitude is 5,000 feet. That's a bit high. So I'm going to bring that down to 2,000 feet. Now there are two knobs down here. Let me zoom in on that. There's an inner and an outer knob. The outer knob is the course. And you'll notice when I turn that to the right, one click, my altitude went from 5,300 feet to 6,300 feet. So this large knob, the course knob, increases or decreases your altitude 1,000 feet at a time. The smaller outer knob, the one closer to the pilot, changes it only 100 feet at a time. So I'm going to use the outer knob and click, 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 bring it down to 2,500 feet, and then I'm going to use the inner knob to bring it down to 2,000 feet. However, if I hit altitude, that's not enough because it won't go there. I have to give it a mode, and what I will use is vertical speed. Now again, like I said, if you're just tooling along and you don't want to fool with all this, you know what? Make sure all this nonsense is off, and turn your autopilot off. Get the airplane level, so you're maintaining your altitude pretty closely, and and you're on the course you want, and just hit AP, and the airplane will do a pretty good job of pointing you where you want to go, and then you have time, you can play around with your hitting bug and stuff like that. Okay, so now to get to an altitude, you have to go into vertical speed mode. So if I'm trying to increase my altitude, I'm going to hit VS for vertical speed mode. Now it's on. Okay. And I know that it's on because you'll notice over here on the band, see this little black box up here where you have the dashed lines? When I hit vertical speed mode, it's telling me that I am trying to climb 200 feet per second. Let's see if that's right. If I want to increase that, I push nose up. Okay, notice my vertical speed is increasing. Now I will climb at 400 feet per second until I reach 2,000 feet, and then it will stop and level off at 2,000 feet. I would also point out this little bug here. Remember the bug on the compass? Well, this you can call your vertical speed bug. It's right over here, and it's above the zero reference, so that tells me I'm climbing. If I were trying to descend to let's say I'm at 4,000 feet and I dial in 2,000, obviously I'm not going to get there if I'm climbing, so I would go to nose down and click on nose down until my vertical speed became a negative number. So if I left it like this, I would descend from 4,000 feet to 2,000 feet at 100 feet per minute. Fair enough? Alright, so it's probably not a bad idea to keep that at zero most of the time. And again, I'm going to turn the vertical speed mode off, and I'm going to turn, see that's different, altitude hold is a different animal. Okay, let's take off and go fly, and I'll demonstrate a few of these things, and I hope this helps. Okay, here we go. Alright, so the autopilot is off, I hope. It is. You can see the flashing red there means my autopilot's off. You might have a yellow also, which means it's off or in standby. Okay, so off we go. And I think I have everything else turned off. Let me make sure I don't want any surprises. Heading select is off. Nav mode is off. Altitude hold is off. Okay, and ignore some of these other things. You really don't need to know that much about them yet. They're not really the part of the basics. So let's take off, and we're going to climb to 1,000 feet and see if we can't put the airplane in a. I'm just going to engage. Once I get to 1,000 feet, I'm on 330. I'm going to try to just level the airplane out and point it at 330 and hit the autopilot button and see how it does just by maintaining a zero roll angle and whatever my current pitch is. So let's try that out. Off we go. So I'm using my rudder because my engine torque is trying to pull the airplane to the left, especially when I first start up. Now, as soon as I get to about 70 miles an hour, I pull back on the yoke, nice and easy, and off we go. Easy. Now, maintain around 70 to 75 on takeoff. It's always a good idea. I don't really have any flaps down. I don't believe. No. Alright, I'm at 66. That's a little steep. So it looks like about, 7 or 8 degrees climb. And we are on our way. So I'm going to try and maintain 033. Pretty close to that. climbing, for those of you who care, up the Thames River, Connecticut, to the Thames River Bridge, and we're headed towards the New London submarine base. Okay. Now, so notice I'm at about 7.5 degree up angle here, the pitch up about 7.5, and I'm just crossing through 1,000 feet, and I'm pretty close. I'm at 340. That's good enough. I'm going to hit the autopilot button. I just engaged it. Now what's going on? Where are we going here? Why do you do this to me? You're not supposed to do that. Interesting. It's not supposed to do that. Not supposed to be doing that. Alright, now it seems to be doing it. It's trying to follow the flight director, but my flight director, it should not be on. Let me see what happens when I turn that off. Maybe that's my problem. Well, let me turn it off, because the autopilot's on, that's why. Alright, well, I'm running along pretty steady right now. And notice I still have my 7 degree pitch up, okay? So I can kind of sit here, cruise along, and now I don't have a heading in here. If I did, now let's say I want to do an altitude hold. So right now I'm about to pass through 2,500 feet. When I do, I'm going to hit altitude hold. Let's see what happens. This is how I figure this stuff out. I just get in here and try it. Alright, here's 2,500 feet. I just hit altitude hold. Notice the airplane, the nose just dropped. And the airplane is going to maintain that 2,500 feet. It's flashing up here in the top. So there's a very easy way to change your altitude. You know, turn off altitude hold. Get the airplane whatever altitude you want. It looks like it's still trying to hold it. Interesting. It should not really be trying to hold that. Alright, we're going to disengage the autopilot. Climb to whatever altitude you want, like 2,700 feet, and hit altitude hold again. And there we are. Okay? Now, that's good enough for our altitude. Let's take a look at our heading. Right now we're steering 063. Let's say I want to come back to the, notice my heading bug's still on 330. I'm going to select heading select on, and it should bank my airplane left, which it is, and take me around until I'm on 330. So I will say this is one of the most complicated autopilots I've ever had to fool with. On the older flight, Microsoft Flight Simulator airplanes, the autopilots were pretty direct and straightforward. They didn't have the attitude hold like this one does, and some of the other things this one has. Okay, so now we're on 3.3, we're sneaking up on 330 here. Alright, now remember, I said you can change the, without touching anything else, I can roll my heading knob. Now let's say I want to come around to west. I'm going to roll my heading knob up here counterclockwise to 270. And that should steady me right out, so I can point wherever I want to go that way. So the autopilot's great if you're, especially on a long flight. It takes a lot of wear and tear off the pilot. You don't have to be constantly checking every a few seconds like you do when you're manning the controls. Of course, it is an automated system, so I wouldn't recommend taking a nap. Might be the last nap you ever take. So there you have it. That's the basics of the autopilot. I hope this helped. It wasn't too confusing. And I frankly think there's a few bugs in this autopilot. A couple of those things just don't make sense. Like when I turn all of this stuff off, I turn off the heading, hold, I turn off the altitude, hold. Oh, let me show you one more thing before we go. First of all, there's a nav mode. If you have a course, if you have a destination plugged into your nav and you have a line going across a purple line on your map showing you the track to your destination airport, you can hit nav instead of heading. If you just hit nav, the airplane, now it's not going to do anything right now because I don't have a nav course, but if I were trying to go to the Chester airport and had a track on the chart to the Chester airport, it would automatically bank me it would have me close in on that navigation course and then change course to follow it right to my destination. So that's very handy for long trips if you're navigating. Alright, so we're going to turn that off. We don't want that on, I think. That's off. That's off. That's off. The vertical speed mode is off. Okay, so now I wanted to show you one more thing. Currently we're at 2,700 feet. We used altitude hold to get that. We're actually wandering off that a little bit now. So what if I want to climb to 3,000? Let's say I want to climb to 4,000 feet. Well, just like my heading I change with this knob up here, I'm going to change my altitude in this blue box up here, blue letters, numbers, and I'm going to use the altitude dial and I'm going to turn clockwise. Remember I said the outer wheel changes 1,000 feet at a time. So what I say, I'm coming to 4,000, so now I'm going to use the smaller wheel to go 100 at a time to 4,000. Alright, so that tells the flight director what altitude I want, but it doesn't tell the flight director how to get there. So to get there, I'm going to click on vertical speed, and then I'm going to click on nose up. Remember our little bug here, which is right now on 0? Every click of the bug is going to increase my upward velocity 100 feet per minute. Okay, so for when you're cruising like this, 300 feet per minute is fine. You're not climbing out from an airport, so you can just tool along. Now, while we're sitting here climbing altitude, I want to point out one more thing to the newer pilots. Right now, I still have my throttle on max. Well, that's nice. What's the matter with doing that? Why can't I do that all the time? I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. One is your fuel consumption. When you're running that engine at max RPM, you've got it about to the limit of that you want, and it's generally you do that on takeoff, and as soon as you reach 1,000 feet, normally you will throttle back to something a little more reasonable. What's a good RPM that I should use for cruising? Rule of thumb, 2,300 RPM is generally considered pretty good RPM. So I'm going to back off on my throttle. Now while I'm doing that, look over here at my fuel flow, my gallons per hour, which are now at like looks like about 15 gallons per hour. That's what? Well, it's at least $5 a gallon. It might be $7 a gallon now. I don't remember. I don't know, but it's expensive. Yeah, ave gas. Now, as I throttle back to 2,500 or 2,300 RPM, look how much fuel I'm saving now. Yes, I will go slower, but I'm going to more than make up. I will be able to go much farther at a lower RPM than I would at a maximum RPM, because I've now got my fuel consumption down to something moderate like 10 gallons per hour, which is plenty. Okay, we're still not to 4,000 feet yet, so I'm going to keep on talking. What else do we have over here? We have so I'm at 2260. Different things will affect your RPM, but remember, we're climbing, so when I level off, that RPM will probably go up a little bit. This is a fixed pitch propeller airplane, so it's like driving a car with only one gear. You want to go faster, you give it more gas. That's pretty much the way it is, right? You can't change gears and reduce fuel consumption that way. For that, you need a complex aircraft, which has a variable pitch propeller. And if you think of a variable pitch propeller, just like an automotive transmission, that as you increase the pitch on the propeller, it's like increasing the gear, going into a higher gear on your car, and allows you have a lot more control over. You can be a lot more efficient with your use of the propeller. A fixed pitch propeller is a compromise. They have to come up with a reasonable pitch that will be acceptable for takeoff, and gain you enough altitude fast enough. But they also needs to be a reasonable pitch, when you're at altitude flying too. Okay, we're just about at 4,000 feet. I'm gonna stop talking now and stop bending your ear. I hope this helped. Just in review, what we talked about was, we talked about the primary flight display for the pilot. I didn't mention this one over here. It's called the MFD, or the something like that, flight display. And it has all your engineering stuff, your maps. A lot of it's redundant. It's the same stuff. Copilot has all the same autopilot stuff. It has all the same communications, readouts here, ground speed, etc. It has a lot of the same things, but the displays are somewhat different. Multifunction display, that's what it means. MFD, okay? And that's it. That concludes this lesson. I hope it helped. As always, it went on for far longer than I expected it to, but there's a lot to talk about. I think there's a few bugs in here, so just be a little careful. But the autopilot can really be a big help for you, especially, I like to fly. I like to go say, I'm going to go see my relatives in Cincinnati, so I'll take off from Groton in London or Connecticut Airport, and push that nav button and have it follow my nav track all the way. And all I got to do is program in the altitude, and then I can go in, third-person view here and watch the view go by. It's so much more pleasant, easy, and you can go work, do some things in your workshop and come back, check it once in a while, so it's a lot of fun. Have a great day.